In this video, we will examine the case for Lewes Lewkenor as the author of Shakespeare's plays. The true author should show himself in the details of his biography. He needs to be with certain people at certain times throughout his career at court, and we might reasonably expect such a genius to be recognized by those around him, to be feted and advanced. The upwards trajectory of the author's career and the heights to which he rises should provide answers to questions about the Shakespeare canon with ease. Lewkenor certainly boasts an impressive biography. Soldier, spy, lawyer, member of parliament, linguist, poet, translator, judge, gentleman, pensioner to Queen Elizabeth I, and ultimately the master of the ceremonies to James I. A privileged position which saw him replacing the absent monarch who preferred hunting to diplomacy. The career and writings of Lewes Lewkenor throw up a plethora of connections to the plays attributed to William Shakespeare, connections far more significant than those found in the biography of the Stratford actor. As we shall see, Lewkenor is to be found in all the right places and answers the riddles that have puzzled Shakespearean scholars for centuries. Let's start at the beginning. Lewes Lewkenor was born around 1560, the second son of Thomas Lewkenor of Tangmere, Sussex. The Lewkenors received patronage from the Earl of Leicester and his brother, the Earl of Warwick. Their relatives included the poet Sir Philip Sidney and the spy master Sir Francis Walsingham. In 1573, Lewes went up to Cambridge, where he became acquainted with Robert Cecil, the son of the Queen's chief minister, William Cecil, Lord Burghley, and struck up a friendship with the poet Edmund Spenser. The two men later provided dedicatory poems to each other's published work. Spenser praised Lewkenor's writing.
As Lewkenor's style that hath her beauty told.
After leaving Cambridge, Lewes entered the Middle Temple to study law, but he left before he was called to the bar. Banished from his homeland for his ardent Catholicism, Lewes fled to the Low Countries to join the Spanish forces fighting the Dutch Protestants. Lewkenor describes the circumstances of his enforced exile.
Since the banishment from my homeland and the confiscation of my property and whole means, I now have to my whole nation become manifestly notorious. Besides several grievous injuries, I have received lingering illnesses and the crippling of my right arm and hand.
Lewes returned to London in 1590 and reported to Lord Burghley on the condition of the English mercenaries who had gone over to the Spanish side. Burghley made a note of their meeting.
The names of such persons, English, Irish, and Scottish, as have pensions of the King of Spain, amount of allowance to each, particulars of their friends and connections, as certified by Mr. Lewkenor at his return out of the Low Countries.
The estate of English fugitives was published under Burghley's guiding hand. As part of his propaganda war against Spain, known as the Black Legend, Lewkenor's treatise was extremely popular, undergoing 5 reprints in 4 years. Lewes details the treachery of a group of English soldiers who had surrendered their strongholds and joined the Spanish. We will discuss these soldiers in depth in our next videos. Indeed, Lewes's writings offer a vivid glimpse into the turbulent lives of these men, many of whom have been recognized by Shakespearean scholars as the archetypes of Shakespeare's soldiers. Edmund Malone, William Hazlitt, Walter Gregg, Kenneth Muir, Carol Enos, Claire Asquith and Gary Taylor have all written about Lewkenor's influence on the plays, characters and themes found in Shakespeare's plays. Lewkenor rose rapidly at court through his connections to Lord Burghley, his son, Robert Cecil, and Anne, Countess of Warwick. We next hear from Lewes in 1592, when he writes from his lodgings near Windsor Castle to Robert Cecil at Hampton Court.
This bearer, my brother, newly arrived in these parts from Bohemia, is one that ever desireth humbly to rest at your loving lordship's service and commandment, and the rather because it pleased your lordship to deal so honestly with him in his absence by delivering a letter of his to me. I doubt not his behaviour there hath been such as becomes a good subject, but he will give a reckoning of himself. By reason of some indisposition of body, I cannot conveniently accompany him, though very desirous to do so. I beseech you to deliver unto him a poor treatise in written hand, which I once delivered unto your lordship at Hampton Court. An honourable personage hath desired to see it, and there is no other copy.
It is in this manuscript that Lewkenor details the real people who populate Shakespeare's history plays. Lewkenor also recounts the Duke of Buckingham's deposition scene, which later appears in Richard III, and he uses a very familiar phrase, the stings and terrors of a guilty conscience, echoing Hamlet's famous speech, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, 8 years before the play was printed. But verbal similarities and textual analysis aren't enough to prove an author. The same arguments are common to other candidates. We'll require far more than that if we are to seriously propose Lewes Lewkenor as the author. Shakespeare's first two published works, Venus and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece, appeared in 1593, dedicated to Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton. The author must have solid connections to the Earl. No connection between William Shakespeare and Wriothesley has ever been uncovered. Lewis's father, Thomas, had served as Member of Parliament for the Earl of Southampton's hometown of Midhurst in Sussex in 1586, and Lewis would serve as Member of Parliament there in 1597. Lewkenor and Southampton later worked together, receiving ambassadors. Lewis published his first translation, The Resolved Gentleman, in 1594. He dedicated it to Anne, Countess of Warwick, one of the Queen's closest friends. He was obviously hoping the Queen would read his work, and he appended certain
Stories for gentlewomen and those who might not know them.
He starts by describing the death of Julius Caesar as it appears in the later play. In a few short pages, Lewkenor touches on so much that is found in the Roman and history plays, most of which are yet unwritten. The Queen recognised Lewkenor's service in 1597, when she invested him as one of her gentleman pensioners, an elite royal bodyguard. Lewkenor has many connections to the stage, most notably when William Shakespeare was accused of threatening the life of the local justice, along with Francis Langley, the owner of the Swan Theatre. Langley records a payment of £50 to Lewes Lewkenor. In 1599, Lewis published his greatest work, The Commonwealth and Government of Venice. The work was well received and influenced The Merchant of Venice, Othello and Volpone. Maurice Kiffin provides a dedication. He was obviously a close friend of Lewkenor's, as he praises.
Lewkenor, whom arms and letters have made known, in this work hath the fruits of either shown.
Henry Elmes, or Helmes, Lewkenor's friend and fellow gentleman pensioner, also praised Lewkenor's work.
Lewkenor, live thou esteemed for thy deserts.
Henry Helmes famously played the Lord of Misrule at the notorious Gray's Inn Night of Errors in 1594, when the Comedy of Errors was performed. Helmes is also a candidate for the Fair Youth of the Sonnets. Sir John Harrington, the Queen's godson, praised
Lewkenor's learned travel and his skill in well-graced style and phrase.
The influence of Lewkenor's translation on both The Merchant of Venice and Othello can only be satisfactorily explained if William Shakespeare had read Lewkenor's manuscript. But as we shall see in our next video, it is Lewkenor who is present at the meeting between the Barbary ambassador and the Queen, from which the character of Othello appears to have been drawn. Lewkenor's service under Baptista del Monte, who, like Othello, served the Venetian Republic as general of the army, completes a compelling picture that revolves around Lewes Lewkenor. Between the years 1597 and 1605, we find Lewkenor styling himself Lodovico Lewkenor, and it is the character of Lodovico who relates the sad story of Othello to the world. The closing lines are left to Lodovico, who accuses Iago of being the setter-on of Othello's tragedy.
Myself will straight aboard, and to the state this heavy act with heavy heart relate.
In 1600, Lewkenor escorted the Duke of Orsino to the debut of Twelfth Night, which opens with the character of Orsino saying,
If music be the food of love, play on.
The same year, Lewis's fourth and final published work appeared, The Spanish Mandeville, or Garden of Curious Flowers, which was published without Lewkenor's permission. In fact, he expressly asked that his name be kept from it, as it was a work he would have consigned to the flames. In the book's dedication, we learn that Lewkenor,
keeping it by him many years, as judging it utterly unworthy of his own name, did lately bestow the same upon me, with express charge howsoever I should dispose thereof, to conceal all mention of him, wherein I should have done both him and myself too much wrong in obeying him.
If Shakespeare had used the Spanish Mandeville as a source, he would have needed access to Lewkenor's manuscript before 1594, when the disastrous Night of Errors occurred at Gray's Inn. The Shakespearean scholar William Hazlitt noticed the impact of Lewkenor's work.
When one turns over the pages of a volume such as the translation by Lewes Lewkenor of the Spanish Mandeville of Miracles of Torquemada, printed in 1600, one perceives one of the collateral helps, which served our dramatists somewhat in the same way and degree as equally trivial indications have served other original creators.
In 1603, Lewis was knighted by James I and later made Master of the Ceremonies. On November 5, 1605, King James would have been preoccupied with the gunpowder plot, but he found time on the 7th of November to grant Lewis his office of Master of the Ceremonies with an annuity of £200, £38,000 at today's value, for life. James stipulates that he has chosen Lewkenor because he is
well-languaged, of good education and discretion, and that any bills he submits shall be sufficient warrant and discharge for the payment out of the treasury.
Tragedy struck on the 11th of March 1604. Smallpox was ravaging the country, and Lewis's beloved wife Beatrice died after a long illness. Although Lewis was
overwhelmed by sorrow,
he quickly remarried the widow of Argall, his cousin and fellow lawyer who had died during the previous year. Like Lewis, Thomas Argall was a descendant of Sir Roger Lewkenor. Between Argall's death and Lewkenor's marriage to his widow, 2 quartos of Hamlet appeared, and a significant change has been made. In the first quarto, the clown says, "Ergo, she drowned herself wittingly." But just a few months later, this has been amended to "Argall, she drowned herself wittingly." This is a significant pointer to the lawyer Thomas Argall. It's stunningly specific to Lewes Lewkenor's biography.
Sir Lewes Lewkenor hath buried his new young lady that was Argall's widow.
Sadly, Catherine too was to die of smallpox within 6 months of the marriage. Lewkenor wrote to a friend,
I have endured many sharp strokes of affliction since I saw you last, never since that time in manner stirring from the bedside of my dearest wife, who having long languished in the greatest extremity of utmost painful sickness, is now called to God this last Monday, released from the woeful sadness of this false world and assumed into the blessed society of his holy angels.
Argall, she drowned herself wittingly.
In 1609, the Goldsmiths' Company allowed the use of their garden house.
For the solace of Sir Lewes Lewkenor and his friends to have a play.
Edmund Malone added his opinion.
The records of the great companies do not suggest that there were many occasions such as that in 1609 when the Goldsmiths lent their garden house to Sir Lewes Lewkenor for him to entertain his friends to a play.
Among Lewkenor's diplomatic duties was the entertainment of foreign ambassadors, and the plays were written as entertainment for those same ambassadors. Lewis escorted ambassadors to the performances at court. In fact, Lewkenor was at all of the known debut performances of Shakespeare's plays at court. For example, we know that Lewkenor was assigned to escort the Danish ambassador.
Venetian was here yesterday and had audience, and this was the manner. 3 coaches were sent to him, the Lord Nottingham's, the Chamberlain's and Worcester's. Mr. Edmunds and Lewkenor were sent to accompany him to court. At the gate, he was met by Mr. Herbert and others.
The Lord Chamberlain George Carey entertained Louis Venetian at Hunsdon House in Blackfriars with the performance of a play by the Lord Chamberlain's men, who
made him very great and delicate dinner. And there in the afternoon his players acted before Venetian Sir John Oldcastle to his great contentment.
Which was either Henry IV, Part 2, or the apology play Sir John Oldcastle. During the Christmas season of 1601, Lewis was assigned to accompany the gallant nephew of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Don Virginio Orsino, Duke of Bracciano, during his visit to the English court. Duke Orsino was invited to the Twelfth Night celebrations at the Palace of Whitehall. Music and plays were commissioned, and the Queen stipulated to her Lord Chamberlain to confer with my Lord Admiral and the master of the revels, for taking order generally with the players to make choice of the play that shall be best furnished with rich apparel, have great variety and change of music and dances, and of a subject that may be most pleasing to Her Majesty. As we have seen in an earlier video, Lewkenor escorted the Moroccan ambassador Abd el-Ouad ben Mesoud, cited by Shakespearean scholars as the inspiration for Othello, was escorted by Lewes Lewkenor, who acted as translator for Elizabeth I.
Mr. Lewkenor was interpreter for the Spanish tongue, but here they departed, on which Mr. Lewkenor and the lords removed further off.
The Venetian ambassador Piero Contarini, who was invited to the cockpit on behalf of the king by Lewkenor and attended a play at the Fortune Theatre in 1603. The Venetian ambassador Antonio Foscarini had been to the playhouse some 3 or 4 times, and his successor, Zorzi Justinian, went with the French ambassador and his wife to a play called Pericles, which cost Justinian more than 20 crowns. He also took the secretary of Florence, Conde Gondomar, the Spanish ambassador, who is the only known foreign subscriber to the first folio, the Venetian ambassador Juan Pizarro, who described the Lord Chamberlain, Sir William Herbert, as
a man of good intention, but one who was influenced by being related to the master of the ceremonies.
The Herbert brothers were described in the first folio as honourable brethren. The printer of the first folio, Edward Blount, was a school friend of Edmund Spenser and had printed work by both Spenser and another of Lewkenor's friends, Robert Dallington. The Blounts and the Lewkenors had a long history of intermarriage, and Lewes Lewkenor's third wife was Mary Blount. Lewes Lewkenor's close association with the theatre remained throughout his life. He escorted the French ambassador Bassompierre to a most excellent English play shortly before his death in 1627. Malone and Mur. The Irish Shakespearean scholar Edmund Malone was the first to spot the influence of Lewkenor's translation of Gasparo Contarini's The Commonwealth of Venice on Othello. He cited examples that showed that Shakespeare had read Lewkenor's book. Malone wrote,
I have no doubt that Shakespeare, before he wrote this play, read The Commonwealth and Government of Venice, translated from the Italian by Lewes Lewkenor and printed in Quarto, 1599, a book prefixed to which we find a copy of verses by Spenser. This treatise furnished our poet with the knowledge of those officers of knight whom Brabantio desires to be called to his assistance.
In 1956, Kenneth Muir delved a little deeper into this connection, noting that the book contained introductory sonnets by Edmund Spenser and Maurice Kiffin, placing Lewkenor amongst a literary elite. The British Library website describes his findings. Kenneth Muir has argued that Shakespeare must have consulted Lewkenor's book when he was writing Othello. Muir highlights Lewkenor's pleasure in hearing travellers' tales of painful inconveniences. He sees parallels in the way Desdemona listens with a greedy ear to the painful story of Othello's life. Lewkenor's candidacy as the hidden author was first raised as a possibility in 1964 by Christopher Whitfield, who identified the influence of Lewkenor's translation of The Commonwealth of Venice as an influence on the Merchant of Venice. He also discovered that Lewkenor had attended the Middle Temple alongside his cousin John Combe III of Stratford.
At first sight, there would appear to be no likelihood of any link between Lewkenor and Shakespeare. But this is not entirely true. William Combe the Elder, the son of John Combe II of Stratford and Shakespeare's friend and legator, John Combe IV, and of his brother Thomas I of the College Stratford, was not only a fellow member of the Middle Temple, but was Lewkenor's cousin as well, a fact which has not hitherto been recognized, partly because he was a Worcestershire and a Warwickshire man, while Lewes Lewkenor came from Sussex. It is not claimed that all that has been quoted from The Merchant of Venice is an accurate version of Lewkenor's statements or even of Venetian law, but Shakespeare was writing a play to entertain the public, among whom were many lawyers and law students. He needed knowledge to give his play verisimilitude, and somewhere he found what he wanted. Here it is merely suggested that he obtained at least some of his knowledge from Lewkenor, particularly that relating to the situation relating to the Doge vis-à-vis the law, and that he obtained it either from Lewkenor's manuscript or from his conversation, or both. Beyond this, we cannot go without letting fantasy lead us. But are we not perhaps justified in doing so in this case? Is not this something more than fantasy? What think you on't? It is no ghost that we pursue, only ghosts of facts hidden in the shifting fog of time which has perhaps parted for us for a moment as we peer into the past.
The Lewkenor family established itself in Sussex, where they formed part of the administrative elite, serving as justices, members of parliament, bailiffs and local government officers. Bardolph, the lieutenant of Calais circa 1415, was related to the Lewkenors, and the Bardolph coat of arms is also incorporated into the Lewkenor arms. In the estate of English fugitives, Lewkenor was the first to record the details of Elizabeth I's famous speech to the troops at Tilbury of 1588.
I cannot here omit to speak a word or two as well of the worthiness and loyalty of those honourable gentlemen of Her Majesty's court, who upon the approach of the Spanish fleet presented not only their persons and lives for the defence of Her Majesty, but also a great portion and yearly revenue of their lands, as also of Her Majesty's great benignity and gracious answer, telling them that she accounted herself rich enough in that she possessed such subjects, assuring them that for her part she would spend the last penny of her treasures for their defence rather than she would be burthenous unto them. O happy people in such a princess, and happy princess in such a people. The Estate of English Fugitives, 1595.
So, we have seen how Lewes Lewkenor was intimately involved with several of the soldiers caricatured in the plays, how his career at court places him at the performance of plays in the company of visiting dignitaries, often praised or mocked in the plays. But how do we prove that Lewes Lewkenor was the hidden author behind the Shakespeare subterfuge? In our next video, we will dive deeper into Lewkenor's career. William Corbett's book, The Master of the Ceremonies, is available from Amazon.